I'm Richard Britz, the originator of the urban farm, along with several other people, back in 1975.
Now, could you tell me how the urban farm came about?
I can. The urban farm was kind of born of a conception, an early conception that Eugene was the city was fairly typical in the United States, being a city of about 100,000, and also typical being at a conjunction of a rail and a river. And usually the conjunction in the rail and the river has to do with lowland lying areas, specifically good agricultural lands, typically, because of the long soil buildups over the years. And so the urban farm and the edible city models came out of a national need applied within an area that could politically sustain the idea.
So would you describe the period of time when it came about? I could hardly see it happening today. So could you give me a little...
I can. I think the following the Vietnam War, there was a strong divisive existing component in the United States. And one of the things that was apparent during that time was that ecological madness was running rampant, not only in the cities but in the rural activities of much of our nation's finances. There was a strong period of denigration of understanding of what the land could do, and simply not only the nation but the actual physical land, and that land was very much in disarray. There were issues, sort of spontaneous pieces of action all around the country, People's Park in Berkeley and things like that, where people were essentially trying to reestablish a healthy connection with the land, but they were few and far between. And in fact, many of those things were early symptoms, I think, of people's real commitment to the land, within a context of Oregon, which had land use laws that had withstood a lot of political turmoil and support over the years. Nationally, it was following a lot of things too. You remember HUD's big program, Operation Breakthrough, to figure out housing and decent living conditions for urbanites throughout the U.S. A dismal failure at enormous cost. And I think that the tone of the times, and this has been picked up by many architects, some of whom are a lot more well known than I am, like Chris Alexander, that felt that people's actions, people's direct participatory actions, had merit and should be honored in the participatory process to improve the physical and biological health of our cities, not only in construction but in terms of land use, land planning, quantities of paving, deteriorated urban environments, and without throwing those enormous burdens on the federal government, which traditionally has held those reins and controlled those monies. So I think a number of people up and down the West Coast specifically were far, far in advance of the East Coast in terms of taking direct and dramatic action towards positive, healthy ecological solutions.
So how did the urban farm come about? How'd you get that rolling?
Well, it's interesting. It was a phased operation. The idea behind the urban farm was to develop a theory body within the university, which, as you know, had been experimenting with an extension of the Oregon Constitution, which is populist-based. It's nonpartisan, essentially, and it deals with issues that make for healthier environment. Remember, we were spinning out of an era where Tom McCall was governor, and local initiatives had political clout, and people could actually achieve a grip on their own environments and take initiatives. So that's basically what we did. We built a theory body. over the years with students and community members with the notions that you didn't really have to settle for these rotting urban environments throughout the United States. And the best place to start would be small cities in subsectors of those cities in neighborhoods. And then the subsector within the neighborhood, which would be the urban block, which everybody's got in the U.S. in small cities. And so we looked around for land which was essentially derelict or underutilized to have it mock up underutilized or off the tax rolls land or on the other side of the tracks or in the lower income neighborhood where it's actually disused and been disenfranchised from biological health. This place here was a kind of a dump yard for old materials, and it was basically a parking lot and a place which was unfit for human habitation for safety reasons. Bums slept here. Different departments from the university would dump wastes on the site, things that they were finished with. And over the years, our goal was to take the theory body and intersperse it with activity projects that would gradually and slowly and inexorably transform the land into a healthier place. And the indicator that we used for that was not only biological cleanup, but the actual production of food that could be healthfully consumed with and grown within the city. The urban environment and the rural environment are pretty much driven by the same economic factors. Federal controls, price guarantees for farmers, and oil subsidies for fertilizers and things of that sort. Much the same as the urban environment is controlled by HUD and DOE and oil consumption and energy manufacturing and things of that sort. And so we thought to remove some of that burden from the federal government would be interesting to tie into some of Mark Hatfield's legislation, which was pending at the time, which would enable people to withhold a portion of their federal income tax and directly invest it in their local neighborhoods, given a structural form of accountability for actual use of the funds. So they could begin to acquire land, and they could begin to acquire the basis of home, a significant personal investment in the physical place, including the land upon which the building sat. So we just started generating projects and kept at it for 20 years now, and slowly but surely built the soil up into healthy raised beds, generated recycling of garbage, planted fruit trees, set up gleaning programs with the local farmers so that truck crops could be brought into the lower income people in the city, and that would bring labor back out to the farms, which was then deteriorated in quantity because of the mechanization of the farms. So along with lots and lots of other people around this area, various programs spun out of those times, not just of the urban farm, but of the developing awareness that this is our home, and it's certainly sitting on the prime agricultural land of the planet. One of the prime agricultural valleys in the United States is the Willamette Valley, and that unless we made a stand within the urban area and on the perimeter of the urban area for control of urban growth and ultimate suburbanization and shopping malls and road widenings and the typical urbanization pattern, which is tremendously destructive to people, land, and energy and costs and money, we could at least raise a flag and say, hey, you don't need to escape from your urban environments per se, continuously emptying out the black holes of the city, having those impoverished black holes consist of a single minority or a single lower income class. Current statistics, 85% of the young people in Detroit are on welfare, children. And that disenfranchisement of the recipient class could be converted to not only receiving benefits but pain from the larger culture, could be converted into personal investment into the land and to the buildings which made up their neighborhood environments. And through that personal investment, just a shovel's energy, a plant in the ground, fruit trees planted would generate a counterbalance to the continuous mobility of the culture, either through fear or through economic disenfranchisement or corporate movement strategies. It would create a stability within urban areas due to the love of their work, due to the love of their investment in the land and their neighborhoods. And crime statistics dropped in Eugene. Local investment increased, and a strong growth, I think, of the organic agricultural movement pervading the city occurred. It's occurred lots of places. There are about 6 or 7 other programs up and down the West Coast now that either were kind of fledgling along with the urban farm or spawned off of urban farm students or faculty. That's why I don't give so much credit to the farm for generating those programs or classes, but we've put an awful lot of people through this program in 20 years. And so have other good schools and good neighborhood activity programs, and it has raised crops and raised hopes, I think.
Oh, we were talking the other day about the reason society resists these kind of programs, and the reason that society resists Christopher Alexander's ideas of urban renewal and his thing about the revamping or actually doing away with the mortgage banking system.
Wow.
This flow of money concept.
Well, it's obviously a radical idea. I mean, there's no question. But having studied Alexander's work for years, and I understand the basic notions, it is antithetical to the way the main society operates. I mean, our society is increasingly centralizing, with greater and greater controls, and yet at the same time, we're under global and federal systems which are increasing in terms of their concentration of wealth and power, information controls, et cetera, et cetera. But within the state of Oregon, we have a constitution which requires public participation, and to kind of inch that out of the way for larger scale controls, whether it be owner-builder housing, which I've been involved with as an architect for years, immediately potentially eliminates about 50% of the mortgage requirements. If you have a country which has enormous unemployment, unmeasured properly, we all know that, and you also have a country which has disenfranchisements of large portions of the society, and we can see those rippling through, then Alexander and a number of other people, Sim Vanderin, tons of people, Calthorpe in California, certainly Prince Charles in England, represents an alternative voice, one which allows people to invest their energies, their time, and their physical abilities into transformation of their labor into potential capital worth for themselves. I mean, if all they've got is time on their hands, all you really need to do is have organizational teams capable of synergizing that group of people to actually generate economic value and share in that with potentially available capital resources. In other words, you could double your GNP, bam, pretty easily. However, the limitations on that are simply, I think, the heavy momentum of a very large society in prescribed ways of doing things, insurance company, wealth, banking, slothfulness, improper management of lots of little people's money in the savings and loan organizations. Where the size grows, the capability of control sometimes diminishes in terms of the investors. So what Alexander did in his work, and what we've tried to do in both the food production and also the housing production, because our company is partially financed by the state of Oregon. That's a company outside of the university. Believes that through those processes, you will begin to make a dent in or at least portray an alternative that could have some utility for people actually being enfranchised with their environments, especially urban, because the urban and rural environment are just one environment. I mean, Portland is a great example. They're just targeted an agricultural valley now for expansion within the urban services boundaries. It has nothing to do with its intrinsic value globally of being some of the finest farmland on the planet. So the notion of the urban farm, the edible city, Alexander's work, is basically enfranchisement. And resource generation, capital resource generation, more permanence, more stability, and more equity. But and more careful use of the capital resources. And there have been other programs that have tried that. The Farm Home Agency has tried self-help housing federally, some of which has been good, some of which has been not so good. But you can see the divergent trends of centralization of capital and decentralization of capital. And they come from bizarre, unpredictable sources. I mean, one would say Mark Hatfield would probably represent this trend. Well, he doesn't. He represents, at least in part, during some of his legislation in those times, 75, 74, his solution was to enfranchise people. He's an Oregonian. You know, it's based in Iowa's Constitution. That's really where some of the good political leaders out of Iowa were coming from. It's constitutional, and yet those are very different from constitutions of other states. But Oregon as Iowa's are very, very similar. Tom Harkin, for example, believes very much the same kinds of things, as I understand it, to develop a centralization policy, puts the capital in the cities, and leaves the rural communities basically dead. And young people migrate to the cities. There's no one there to take over the farms. They go belly up, you know, either that or they outbuy themselves on equipment to try and take care of the labor needs. Families dissolve, and basically you have one large farm called Nebraska or Iowa growing a single monocultural crop. And you can't do that in a place like this. It's just, it's human nature to diversify, I think. To diversify plantings and growings and productivity, and that type of productivity, both in terms of housing and in terms of food, generates surprising results. Centralization generally produces predictable results, and I think in our fear of unpredictability, we have overcompensated in the area of centralized control. And it's just that unpredictability that will generate happy surprises for us, you know. Full orchards in blooming in the city, chickens crowing, you know, to get you up to make your next buy on the stock market at 6 o'clock in the morning, you know. Natural places, wild animals cruising through here, dragonflies, ducks, geese, deer in the city. And it's only our mental maps and our mental models that preclude humans from participating in generating their own structures or codes, which are also mental maps, or humans from participating in the act of growing their own food. Pretty basic stuff. Actually, it's very primitive. The original concepts, as I understand it, of Alexander's were ways to give clues to people. You know, a window seat's a good place to catch the south light. Simple. Most people don't think about that in an era of cheap oil or nuclear power. They don't care about the sun. Well, orientation to land, crops, growing seasons, building heat is timeless. It is a timeless way of constructing your environment, and so many of us understand the alternative. We've worked in big cities. We know what it's like to live in a high-rise building. We know how demeaning it is, and there is no opportunity for personal investment in urbanizing areas throughout the world. This is not an American situation. This is global. And so the global resource is the land, is the soil quality, is the water quality that's here. Energy is certainly global. And the old saw of acting locally and thinking globally is more than a cliche, and it's a durable notion, which I think underscores some of his work.
Now there's an intrinsic resistance to accepting this among the establishment. What would you say is the potential for overcoming that resistance? Now, Chris has tried through, there is now the major housing initiative in America today for low-income housing is Habitat for Humanity,
yes,
which is a good program. Chris has actually volunteered to design and more humanize the process itself, and they've rejected it thus far. So, I mean, what do you see as a potential for overcoming this resistance to ideas of this nature?
Oh boy. I taught here for 7 years and taught in Arizona State University for 5. And I used to think it was education, the development of ideas. When I published the Edible City Resource Manual in '81, I thought, well, I'm done. I've got a demonstration project here. People like it. This students work. The neighborhood comes in. They get food. We grow stuff for low-income people and provide it to local restaurants and tighten up the knot. I've built some of the passive solar earth sheltered buildings with owner builders, and they've been marvelous projects, commercial projects as well as residential, large ones, and they have been successful. But the climate from which they spring has to be fertile, like the land and the plants growing. I think the resistance is not lack of ideas. I think it's lack of examples. And I think as energy and capital centralizes further and further, the likelihood of an offbeat experiment being generative of policy declines. And so, like any good laboratory experiment, like the Manhattan Project, for example, they had 7 different teams working on the same problem, only one of which actually produced a result. And the country at that time had a notion that divergent minds who are committed to the land, who are committed to their country, who are committed to the people's well-being of any economic level, has taken some hits, I think. I think the media is really important in that regard. The media has tended to portray the terrible as sensationalist events, and the more mundane stuff, the woman in the community that looks after the children when everyone else has gone to work because they have to have 2 households two parents working, the cop on the beat who actually stops to take care of people rather than driving by in his armored vehicle. Little projects like this, Alexander's projects, where someone actually asks the other workers, how is this going? The people who participated in the decision making to bring together some of the design concepts. Those are phenomenal rewards of enfranchisement and mutual respect between people. I think you can see strong divergence in as the professional communities get under more and more stress. They want greater and greater control. They don't want the public messing around in the construction industry. And so the codes, the laws, the controls are tightened. Those screws are tightened down, which preclude efforts for people to actually intervene in those controlled, tight, unionized sectors, which are much more tightly controlled in the east portion of the United States, and virtually ironclad due to the insurance companies and financing agencies, and probably the most important thing is litigation. People are driven into models of fear, and they will become inert. They will just stop in place and or pick up arms and take their own actions, regardless of the consequences. And when things get to that point, someone should ask the question, can't we try a few smaller scale experiments and measure them and see how it works? How's the neighborhood economics doing? How's the physical environment improving? How are the trades integrating rather than being divided among one another and forced through fear to point to the person with the least resistance? These are bad circumstances. And so I respect Alexander's work, and I respect the University of Oregon for giving it a shot with the Oregon experiment, and I respect the state of Oregon for enfranchising its people to attempt to provide an alternative, much as our healthcare model is an alternative in the state. The model projects should be financed and evaluated and monitored for cost effectiveness relative to the mainstream. And I think it goes beyond Republican and Democratic rhetoric, because a successful program will integrate among both of those theoretical bases. And I think that's really what the basis of populism always was. It was the land, the environment. That's what McCall got. That's what he made clear in his statement. And I think politically those ideas also are important. Back in those days you had strong support from people like Wayne Morse, who were not speaking the normal line, and phenomenal groundswell support. But those days will probably come again.
We're going to get too optimistic.
Yep.
Can we do 5 minutes of this and then come back? Sure can.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, we'll give Richard a break here. Why don't you unplug me there?
damn good mic.
It is a damn good mic.
That guy. Okay, that's a good one.
Okay, so we're rolling. Okay, I wanted to ask you. One of the ideas that Chris has had is that things went wrong at a certain point in this century, or thereabouts. I wonder if you have any thoughts about that. I mean, what really happened to make us go so terribly wrong in the direction of prefab and all the horrible little that we can, any of us. It's one of the few architecture things everybody can do. You can tell when a house was built after 1950.
Sure. Okay. This is an area that is near and dear to my heart. It's something I've thought about a long, long time. And it relates to industrialization. It relates to the industrialized process. And some people see the industrialized process as a demon. I think it's more like a siren. I think it's more like a lure onto the rocks of the notions of potential limitless power, potentially limitless scale of operations, of global mining, global manufacturing of materials, globalization of an automobile, the world car, interconnected economics between states, nation states, the development of more and more powerful biological weapons, greater contributions to health and well-being through medical technology developments, mythologies essentially. And that, like the Janus concept, technology has two heads, it has two faces. It has produced increases in health, it has produced it has the capability to produce housing for much of the world. At the same time, it's at a tremendous cost of dehumanization and simplification, where I think we went wrong in our adoption of technology and the greater and greater centralization of capital resources, labor pools, skilled workers, is that we forgot our people and that we forgot the wealth that was genetically encoded in them through the diverse populations of the world. Craft went away. The concept of craft became a school of arts and crafts, with arts being the preeminent school. Crafts are trades, guilds. The notion of apprenticeships went away to disposable parts, replaceable parts, requiring higher and higher technological skills, which had not necessarily any relationship to the quality of the built product, but it definitely a relationship to the speed of production and its replicability. And industries adopted these notions. Certainly computers, certainly CAD/CAM manufacturing for, quote, cost savings and increased speed and greater efficiencies of use of materials. It's where the high-rise building came from. Was it a technological concept or was it a social concept of stacking, which diminished people's attention to the land, even perception of the land as other than a flat, meaningless, biologically useless table upon which to build? Le Corbusier's work demonstrated that. I think he threw a couple of small bones to the landscape between the buildings, but essentially it's compartmentalization of people, individuals, in rental units. And the notion of home went away with increased mobility from Henry Ford. Mobility became the god, stability became lack of job mobility, which means lack of investment in your community, or lack of responsibility to your neighbors when you're moving 2 years, every 3 years on the average. The tools of benefit that came out of the Industrial Revolution were replication, manufacturing efficiencies without feedback loops, without any attention to what types of people were ultimately being manufactured in the cities, other than generating a whole new industry of sort of social service workers to then come in and manufacture means by which these people could be taken care of. Whole social services industries blossomed. So the technological impacts of new building types, new materials, new synthetics, new armaments, at once was an attempt at liberating the human spirit, but in fact encapsulated it in greater and smaller, greater and closer, tighter packed densities. Paradoxically, the response from the general public was probably the most massive response to these technological gains, I think, is the growth of suburbia. And the notion that had been inherent in the built environment for millennia, the village, the clan, the cluster, personal knowledge of one's neighbors and concern through their retirement years and integrated family sizes. The technological drive was to simplify and perfect a single segment of a community like Sun City, where it's all old people, no children allowed, And these are bizarre concepts that have been widely adopted and widely loved. Yet within the overall framework of the well-being of large segments of the population, we've got to reconsider those.
Now, could you talk about pattern language? It seems to address a lot of these ideas you just talked about.
Yeah, pattern language does. As I said before, there are a number of different works around. Alexander's work in architecture and planning, Kenneth Boulding's work in system science, von Bertalanffy's work in general system theory, dozens of quality writers and quality thinkers and quality people in dozens of professions have their corollaries in their written works about alternatives to the simplified model of production. Not very many have sort of workbooks, or what I prefer to call the patterns as clues toward finding a way forward. You can't go back. Forward to a reconsideration of the qualities of human interactions, the quality of their interaction with the light, the sun, the built environment, the neighbors, the relationship of space between buildings, gathering spaces. William White's work is another good example. That were slowly being factored out of the society, and I think that's one of the reasons why the pattern language took off so much, because it gave concept bites, like sound bites, in small enough appetizer-type doses that people could then gradually, through years of perceiving the pattern language or using it or pondering it, map to see a more patterned whole. And I think it's a brilliant concept in the sense that it assumes there's lots of competition for people's time, and that you might light up on one of these little concepts and then tie it together with 2 or 3 others, and then 3 years later tie it 12 together, or 100 or 1,000, and then through these little landscape of the mind clues one might find a more interesting or decent or utilitarian balance toward the integration of those of us who are responsible for the built environment in our country, and the rest of the world, really, for that matter, because they watch what we do quite a lot, and we generate many more patterns in the mainstream profession than the pattern language does at this time, especially increased specialization and larger agglomerations of professionals financed by larger and larger agglomerations of capital, and larger project-based, multinationally financed developments. Disney World, for example, is North Florida, pretty much. Euro Disney is a pretty good example of major capital drop on a small French portion of the countryside. And I think those larger and larger agglomerations are so different than the notions of pattern language that it's hard to find your way back to just a little simple pattern, let alone begin to network them together into a theory body which will inform people's actions. And so the pattern language is a wonderful concept, primarily because of the way I think people think, which is not in grand wholes, not strategically, not globally, not integrative among varying disciplines of learning, of understanding, so that their attempts to conceive and initiate are diminished as things continue on the path they're going. They become more sort of unwilling victims of whoever likes to put whatever notion across regarding building materials, land use, urban taxation, their place. You'll never, almost never, hear in discussions of the homeless throughout the nation the fact that these people are homeless. They're not apartmentless or camp-less or rental housingless. They are homeless. They have lost their embodiment to the notion of home, and therefore they can't find their way back. And so they will have to find their way forward using some kinds of maps, built projects, positive experiences that have occurred, books written, films made, activities generating, neighbors participating, positive examples. And that's more convincing than anything else, I think.
So when you think of the current melange that we find ourselves floundering in, and we drive down 99, or we go by our new chip factories, or so on and so forth, and we look at the architecture. How did that come about? I mean, how did the blue roofs of IHOP and it's become our vernacular architecture in some ways, much like this wonderful Rudowski book, Architecture Without Architects, where we look at the vernacular.
Yeah.
It's up 10,000 years of building, and then we look at what we've got. We've got fucking IHOP and Denny's.
Yeah, very much so. How did it come about? That's a great question. That is a tough question. Again, I think in part it came about because of the magic of technology, the replicability, the certainty that you go into any McDonald's across the planet and they are identical. I mean, they feel identical. You have in these programs of pattern language or community development or neighbor participation in the development of healthy environments, or the organic agriculture movement in the cities, what I call the edible cities. There is an element of surprise in those. There is an element of uncertainty. There is an element of dirtiness. I mean, literally, the dirt. But in a McDonald's or an IHOP, they are replicable symbols of purity and safety that are privately managed for the good of a great deal of people. And so the adoption of that cleanliness, that purity, as almost a spiritual drive, I think, toward a replicated, safe, predictable, cost-effective environment, because the end costs are never considered. The end costs that were always in great sophistication considered by villagers or village builders or developers, or the transition of cultural materials or craft, or the old blacksmith or the brickmaker passing that on to his son. they've been cleaved apart from our societal direction and replaced with new icons. And those new icons are enormously powerful because they will promise you things and hide you from the impacts of the source of materials, the end product of the waste. They will be packaged in a pure, unadulterated, replicably identifiable form, such as the blue roof, or Howard Johnson's, remember the orange roofs, or the office building. Building codes are standardizing like you cannot believe. They are gangbuster standardizing, to the point where essentially, globally, there is only one building form for large quantities of people, and that's the high-rise reinforced concrete structure, and possibly the steel structure. But greater and greater mass, volume, replicability equals cost effectiveness for the manufacturer and for the wholesaler, not necessarily for the retailer, and definitely not necessarily for the consumer. If you take into consideration nutritional value, if you take into consideration waste management costs, if you take into consideration hard to measure loss of value between home cooking and fast food. You know, what are the benefits of home cooking? Well, you grow your food, you prepare it together as a family. You deal with the garbage. You probably have animals to feed it to, so you increase the cycle. Rather than take that entire cultural phenomenon, which is millennia old, and provide for people an opportunity to do things without any work. I mean, there's a reason why people aren't working. They may not need to, as long as they prescribe to a certain ethos in the built environment. They don't need to work. All they need to do is turn real estate. All they need to do is sell lots of franchises on a single idea.
Well, you know, one of the ideas that comes back to me that Chris has talked about a lot in his kind of the central part of one of his theories is the idea of making a house a commodity as opposed to a home.
Absolutely, no question about it.
Talk about that.
Yeah, well, you've heard the notions of the house is your single largest investment in your life, and I think that again, like the Janus figure, is a two-edged sword. It is the largest capital investment most people will ever make, but the true term of investment has been clipped off. Investment is I put my heart into this building, I put my attention to this community, I put my worth in the worth of my neighbors or my family, has been clipped off that equation because it's just another object for sale. And much of what has driven, quote, the real estate boom, and many articles you'll see sometimes in the New York Times say, new housing starts up, good for the economy. Maybe so, maybe not. You know, if you read the economy in the largest sense of the word, the disenfranchisement of turning homes into a commodity is a tragic and almost irreversible loss of the human condition, in my opinion. I had a good chat one time with Jean Tate, a large real estate woman here in Eugene, about that, and I said, we disagree so fundamentally that I'm amazed we're even talking, because your job is to flop real estate as fast and as frequently as you can, upgrade the zoning from residential to commercial or industrial, single family to multifamily, wipe out neighborhoods, clear areas, big it up, build it up bigger. And I said, we really disagree fundamentally in that, because the real estate industry is gigantic, and it's based in mobility and it's based in continuous uprooting. and manufactures dissatisfaction with the simplest of dwellings because there's always something bigger with more garages, or this one's got a hot tub or a deck, or that its location is more rural. Rather than describing the field within which the concept of home lives. Turf, neighbors, eyes on the street, somebody to watch your dog when you're away, childcare, all the basics of civilized living is right out the window. Long-term friendships, investment in your community is not a monetary commodity. It's a heart issue, and that's been clipped off the equation. Very carefully, very methodically, and it's driven into people in every catalog they look at, every real estate brochure, every portion of the mortgage industry, any television ads, any type of equipment that you have will be obsolete tomorrow and you must upgrade. Any kind of object that you own must be upgraded, whether it's an automobile or a building or a camera or a car or your neighbors. Certainly wouldn't want to live with these geeks all your life when over here is a shining new neighborhood. It just rips those roots right out of the ground every single time. Alexander flies in the face of contemporary financing because the notion is pervasive, overwhelmingly huge, that those mobilities create loyalty to someone who will pay your mortgage for you. A job, Westinghouse, GE, ITT, IBM will move you periodically out of in the eras of the 50s. The land war were fundamental. Obviously, Europe geared up for industrialization before the United States. Obviously, Japan geared up for industrialization prior to the United States, although people don't like to think about that. With the sort of front-running development of steel production, new building materials, new ways to see human beings as potentially packageable items, due to population pressures and minimized land availability. Older in Japan, older in Europe, population blooms in both places. America being a broad, open country, some people could see ahead and say, we need to make more careful use of our resources, and so let's get away from our native-born architects. Let's get away from the old H.H. Richardson School and the John Wellborn Root School and the Lewis Sullivan School and the Frank Lloyd Wright School, and get away from those nasty organic materials of stone and wood and careful landscape arrangements and slower times and more handcrafted development. That's what's so unique about Alexander's work. There's nothing new in it, and that's great. I mean, it's new at the time, but there is nothing new in it. Most of the best architects in the United States has ever had were and are still being displaced by European influence, with the possible exception of sort of global media-inspired event architecture. Local initiatives are often overlooked for the outside expert that comes in as a consultant or as an architect from out of town. Philadelphia architect does the Seattle Art Museum when there's 20 architects in Seattle that would do a much more competent job, because it's the welcoming in of a foreign presence that gives you sophistication. Chris Alexander goes to England to build. He's a foreign presence. I would challenge those issues because they're not as crystal clear. Sometimes a foreign agent or a person from another country who's had broader experience in technology should be welcomed and paired up.
Actually, Chris grew up 4 miles from the building.
There you go. Should be welcomed and paired up so that real cultural exchange goes on. the competition that was inevitable for those positions, Gropius, Mies van der Rohe, the big hitters of the industrialization forefront of construction in the United States, didn't speak to the people who were occupying those structures. It spoke to the materials manufacturers. It spoke to controlling of the construction process, like the Europeans had done since the guilds. And these notions of public participation in the planning process were anathema, clumsy, messy, time-consuming, when an efficient German expert could do the job so much more inexpensively with so much efficiency of use of materials. Efficiency is a killer concept. It's a wonderful and hateful thing at the same time. And that in part was spawned out of the World War II effort for industrialization of the U.S. Replication of houses, plop, 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 Litchfield Park. Just total replication, repetition, replication, predictability of manufacturing, pre-purchase contracts, capitalization off buyers before the building was built. It was separated out. The financing was separated out as a separate generating engine of construction, not one which followed the cultural dictums which evolved the building out of the culture, or the local craft availability, or material sources. We now have a global economy. We ship aluminum from bauxite ore from here, foundry it here, build it together, extrude it here, bam. Big companies. And certainly, as I've said, it's not all bad, not at all. But we have to temper our understanding of efficiency for the larger social goals of healthy people, psychologically healthy, or prepare ourselves for some real nasty events.
Such as?
Well, continued depreciation of urban centers. The crux of the edible city was that the city, as it decreases its diversity, both in land use and population type, continually forces people further and further away from the center, the former center, many of which were built around manufacturing, so that the people who are left at the center live in these essentially universal black holes, which are somewhat depopulated, disintegrated in the sense of environmentally damaged, and it's just cast away. And so lines of communication become larger, transportation modes require greater and greater infrastructural costs to get the escaped workers back to the center of the city, which has the high-rise buildings that are barred up at night. Detroit's a classic example. I mean, probably the classic example. Pittsburgh was a classic example until people started reinvesting in the center and started re-diversifying. But those trends of expansion and thinning go on simultaneously in cities. The reinvestment into the city centers, I don't see. What I do see, though, is a lot of spontaneous effort of the people who have been left behind to make their places better. I could name you a dozen cities that have urban agriculture programs, urban greening programs, neighborhood watch programs, development of more local neighborhood economics, reinvestment programs from local banks. Many good things are happening simultaneously with this egregious and total expansionist growth. It's paradoxical, and that's why we've had trouble in the 20th century understanding what the hell's wrong. Because growth appears to be getting bigger, more wealth, but the centers typically, except for Oregon and some Seattle areas that I know of, tend to start thinning out the cities and simplifying areas. You have the black area. You have maybe the white suburb or the mixed suburb. And then you have divergent ethnic groups separating into smaller and smaller cells of survival. Greater increase of disintegration in virtually every category, not just ethnic. But we have to map those good projects. We have to map them. We have to show them. We have to say, put those people in the lens and say, how's it going? You know, in the face of these negative statistics and the fact that you're going to be dropping off the welfare map here pretty quick, what's your alternative? And if you don't have one, that's when we call on our universities and say, do you give a crap about the cities you live in? You know, we just talked at MIT, and there are interesting programs afoot in Philadelphia and Boston and Kansas City and, you know, Atlanta and East Palo Alto, you know, and LA. There are interesting things happening there that are contradictory and therefore misunderstood with the main tone of things. But we should know enough now to put a little spotlight on some of these successful programs, because they're successful in human terms that need to be measured in something other than capital return.
Now, one last statement or idea. Could you tell me what influence the writings of Christopher Alexander has had on your own thought, your own?
The writings of Christopher Alexander, I think, mark a period of time. As I said, it's really interesting because, in my opinion, the fundamental body of work was born of a time. And I could probably name a dozen people who have influenced me as a professional architect and planner equally as much. But the most important thing for me is that he did that. He wrote those books. He built teams to build those books. He built projects. He built a culture, a subculture within a large, overwhelming culture. And from that I take great optimism. And I know dozens of other people who, within their own disciplines outside the architectural engineering planning field, who are essentially doing the same thing. Networking those people together is a neat idea because they're occurring all over the world. And so, you know, whenever you hear of a good thing happening, it makes you feel good. And you never expect it to be perfect. You never expect it to be textbook theoretically applied. There's always glitches in it. There's always some problem somewhere here and there. But as one of my very good friends in the field has said, problems are about solutions, not about blame. And our culture has taken a very strong drift toward blaming people rather than taking note of the successes. A 2% error will queer the whole project, whereas a 98% success rate is overlooked. And for me, Alexander's always represented that 98% success rate, primarily because I have never involved myself with the sort of worshipful cult of Alexander, but I see him as a project of our times that is unique, wonderful, and should be supported. More and more, replicated thousands of places, and monitored, measured. Check it out. Because I don't think very many people know about Christopher Alexander. The architecture profession is typically very competitive, and one architect will never applaud another architect because they want the commissions. But his work, and much of what many of us believe, is not about that. It's not about economic competition. It's about solutions that our society needs. That's why we're given licenses, is to breed these ideas in a diverse field so that they, looked at in a pattern, at a whole, appear to give us a map toward a better way, a happier future, and not just this bleak, cynical overlook. We need physical places. We need theoretical writings. We need happy people who will never forget that man for centuries. And we need integrated cultures around the world, sharing their best technological information.
Great. Thank you, Richard.
My pleasure. My pleasure. That's what I believe.
Thought about it. Maybe we could kind of diminish everybody.
That's right. We'll need a lot of that.
Make the camera and these guys be better. So here it is. Enough of that upshot stuff. Could you give me your name and what you do so I can do a sound check here?
Okay. My name is Ann Bettman, and I am a landscape architect, and I'm a professor of landscape architecture.
Where's it?
That sounds good.
You said?
I think so.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to do an establishing.
Okay, you have to back up.
So, and how long have you been doing this?
Been at the farm? I've been at the farm since '83, so I guess about 12 years, although I did take a bit of time off for a couple of years.
You can talk to me.
Just saw that lens just go like that.
That's why I'm over here. You look at me.
Okay.
Don't bother with that machine.
Okay.
Okay. Well, so Richard actually was giving me a little background about you, as far as he sort of got this thing rolling, and then you came into town and sort of made it your own, more or less. Could you talk about how that process went? And
Sure. He started it, and then when he left the university, it essentially, I guess, a graduate teaching fellow, just in frustration of the lack of support, just rototilled the whole area flat. And I had never been involved with a farm when he was teaching it, but I saw that, and I just felt really sad that that whole program had just fallen apart when he left. So I did a slideshow, showed it to the department, and said, well, surely, the Department of Landscape Architecture should have some land. What do you want to do with this? Somebody should take this on. And they said, great, you do it. And I said, okay. I hadn't done it. And so when you take on something like that, especially after somebody as charismatic as Richard is, you probably have a couple choices, but it seemed to me that what I tried to do was find out what it was to me and make it more my own. And my interests, Richard's as you know, very political, and saw it as a model for change, a kind of political, economic, ecological change, model city kind of thing. And that was, those were ideas I was familiar with, but those were not kind of things that I could take on and talk about very comfortably. So when I first took it on, I did what I knew about, which was plants, and tried to do a lot more planting permanent plants. The classes were smaller, and we had, where this building is, there were, arcade of trees, and it had a lot more flowers because I liked flowers. And we did kind of environmental art things and talked about ritual and really talked about this as a place more. And this circle was created one year when somebody did the ley lines of the farm, strung them from these big walnut trees, and decided this was the center of the farm. And so I kind of made this, a place in the garden itself. And so gradually, I guess over that period of time, took on more responsibility, and have come to ideas that are much closer now to the original ideas of the farm. I'm much more interested in growing vegetables and having people grow food, and really knowing how to grow your own food, and feel very strongly about organic food, and can see the political relevance of this as a model. But it's taken me kind of a while to kind of get to that. But it still has all these traces of all these other phases that it's gone through. And Steve Solomon taught the class for a couple of years, and when they built this building, I didn't want to be around for that process. It was too painful for me to kind of see it all torn up and everything. So I took a couple of years off and passed it on to Steve Solomon for a couple of years, and he had an entirely different, viewpoint. And the farm can absorb anybody's viewpoint, and that's the nice thing about it. He wanted to grow big vegetables. He didn't care anything about community. He didn't care anything about the place. He wanted people to grow big vegetables. And I've always thought that what you should do is teach people to work together, and teach people to, understand the land and have a good time, so that they'll want to do it again, and if they don't know everything about soil science, it's all right. They can learn that, if they have a good time, if they like what they grow, if they eat it, then you can kind of hook them, and then they can learn more on their own. So I've had a kind of less of an agenda in some way. I want people to like the place, and they do. So.
Well, speaking of people, I guess that's what I really would like to talk about next, was that what do you think the students get out of being here? I mean, you talked about relevance to land and these kind of things. I mean, is this part of what the experience would be as you would see it, or?
Yeah, I think we have a lot of different kinds of students. So most of the students come from all over the university. Very few landscape architecture students, although I'm about to change that this year. So people come from all different departments, and there's a terrific range of students. Some of them are already totally clued into everything we talk about. They're doing it in anthropology or architecture or journalism or something, and this is a place where they can be outside and talk to other people and that. So there. But then there are a whole lot of people who have never worked physical labor, for one thing, and that's not encouraged across the road there. There are a lot of people who have certainly never grown their own food, and there are a lot of people who don't know how to eat. I mean, so that if you don't grow corn and tomatoes, they don't quite know what vegetables you would be growing. So you do a lot of kind of basic education of, and so Pete, the GTF this summer, has been wonderful about actually cooking up food. Every Thursday he cooks up stuff for people. Beets, so some people discover food here, some people discover working and really just love the working part. Some people just want to get away from paperwork and inside and want to see some tangible results. And some people go on to do this kind of work in one way or another, and so they get some real hands-on experience, either in a learning capacity or in a teaching capacity. With these big classes in the last few years, with 125 people, I've had to rely on a lot of teachers, and so I actually now spend more of my time teaching teachers. I have very minimal contact with the students, which is kind of too bad. But I also kind of like that organizational stuff, kind of trying to set up the whole thing. But that's more what I'm doing. So students get a lot of different things. I don't know that I've ever talked to anybody who was too disgruntled. You can kind of get whatever level you want. We can always give more information if you want it. But I've seen people try to teach it like a class across the street and give a lot of paper and do reading and all that, and students balk like crazy. They don't want to do that over here. This is not what they signed up for. And there are always a few of them who are kind of surprised that they're going to work too, so there is that end of it. When you get them digging for the first couple of days, they say, hey, this isn't what I signed up for. There are a couple of those, but then they kind of get into it.
Well, we are so disenfranchised from the land. And a lot of the students are middle class or upper middle class people. They come from suburban areas where they hire a Mexican to come in and take care of the plants, whatever they are, and their other relationship to land is pretty non-existent. Do you find that this actually can engender a kind of relationship to the land, or is there a correlation there with the?
Gosh, I think there's a correlation. That's the whole basis of it. I don't know. I haven't studied the results to track down and say 5 years later or 10 years later, are these people either doing something like this, or are they at least more informed or more caring about the land? But I'm sure that it's a positive experience that they've had. And so I think that's all you can, I guess, work from. Assume that if they have some positive experiences, somehow it will lead to other kinds of things.
Now, as part of your other job as a landscape architecture professor, and I know you lead very popular classes in going out and identifying and looking at various trees and bushes around the campus. How do you integrate this with the built environment in a way that it becomes a whole?
The trees and shrubs, or the farm part?
Yeah, everything.
Everything?
The combination of green, I guess we would say, that grows. And if so, how does that work, and what do you try to instill?
Well, let's see. I'm not sure I understand quite what you're getting at, but certainly when we're out looking at trees and shrubs, well, there are actually several phases. The first thing I do in those classes is I take people out to the native landscape, or at least as natural, quote-unquote, native as it can get. So the river, the butte, Pisgah, and the places that can at least give people an idea of what this place was like before white people came. It's always been a managed landscape because of the Native Americans, but white people have had obviously a terrific impact on it. So the first thing I try to have them understand is what the native plants are, and the plant communities, and how they work, and what that means about soil and water and all that. I feel like that's the basis. And then when you come into the city, the most structuring plants are the trees. So we look at those first and talk about how they can be used. And we don't actually have that many native plants, so we spend a lot of time looking at plants that are from other parts of the country. And I've kind of wrestled with that because I think native plants are important, but the city is no longer a natural place. And you're not going to probably do away with all these plants that people have brought from all over the world and people have come to love, and that I think work very well in places. So we do deciduous trees in the fall, and in the winter we do conifers and all the evergreens, the broadleaf evergreen shrubs. And what I'm going to do this year, instead of doing spring plants, which is more walking around, and it is seeing all the fall plants as they come on in the spring, because I like people to try to start to make that cycle. Even though I don't have them for one whole year, at least the leaves can be on the tree, color up, fall, come back on, go green, and so you can kind of get the cycle. But this year I'm going to have all the landscape students cycle through the farm for their spring term, and have them actually work growing vegetables, and we'll still do some of the walking around looking at trees, but I want them either to learn how to grow food or to teach other people if they are familiar with that. Some of them may feel like they know that. So it'll be very interesting for me to work with a good proportion of the class being landscape students, and see how that changes it, and see if it's, I really can't predict what that's going to do. My hope is that because we will have spent all year kind of talking about these things, that it will be an improvement. And I've been frustrated in the past that I've tried to talk to landscape students about maintenance and management and care, and I finally have come to the conclusion you can't talk to anybody about that. You can't teach somebody how to take care of a growing plant simply by talking about it. I think it's like telling somebody how to love somebody. You can give a whole lot of examples, but until somebody is actually engaged in that process, they won't know very much. So I'm hoping that by actually having people involved not only with the plants, but this is a whole place that they, both classes will actually be enriched by that.
I guess I was a bit obscure, but what both Greg and I are...
now you can ask me what you really wanted to know.
No, that was fine. That was wonderful. That was wonderful. No, and it was close. It was close. I was off. I just realized that. See, both Greg and I are, one of the things that we're concerned with is urban greening, and the idea of taking an urban landscape that might be otherwise quite hideous, but by the integration of plants and growing things, we can transform it. And I think Eugene is one of those kind of places. And
could be. Is sometimes. And could be more, I think.
And I was wondering, my question was, is this part of the curriculum where you show your students the integration of the plants with the built environment?
Oh, sure.
And how that works together.
Sure.
And that sort of thing.
And that's their whole focus of study, pretty much. So they're getting a lot of that in all their other classes. What's unusual or distinctive about my classes is I finally have it set up now that I teach only outside, which I think is wonderful. So I'm actually showing them and walking them around or having them do these things, but that's the information they get in all their other courses, is talking about transforming cities and reclaiming cities, and so that's definitely what it's all about.
What you're showing them.
I'm walking them around and having them
really
actually
like that
look.
idea. The whole idea of teaching this in a text, in a text.
Or slides.
And
People do a lot of slides.
It's so silly, comparatively speaking. When it's here.
It's here, but it's also, people spend a lot of time showing slides of all these other places and precedents, and all that. And that's good. That's good. If people, and a lot of people have not traveled, haven't seen, half of our students in the landscape program are graduate students, which means they have a degree in something else. They generally come back to school when they're 25, 30, 35 or something. And so they maybe have been other places, but a lot of the students are Oregonians, and they've been to Portland maybe, and they haven't seen a lot of things. So that part of it's good, but it's really kind of seeing things and touching them and smelling them and feeling places. It's very hard, I'm sure you must know, trying to film something, to film a place and give you a real idea of what it feels like. You can see it, but that doesn't, it's not the same thing.
No, it becomes almost impossible actually with video because it flattens everything out.
Yeah,
and makes it electric.
Especially if it's a complex place.
Right.
The simpler it is, the easier it is to,
A person is usually the easiest because they are, of course, a talking head, but it's all right to squish them up and make them flat. This that has so many layers of complexity,
Yeah.
My own theory about interviews with people is I like to come right in on them and be really tight so you can see what they're saying and how their eyes look when they say it, and farm and what do you produce on it completely? I see there's fruit trees over here. Is that part of it?
Yes, it's actually a big L. I don't know if you've gone back that way, but there's a big, we've spent most of our time this year expanding back into what are the old biology gardens. So this is kind of the old heart of the farm, but this is maybe a third of it. 2/3 of it is actually over there. It's got a bean teepee and some experiments and some corn and a whole bunch of new fruit trees that continue this old orchard. This was an orchard that was planted, I don't know if Richard talked about it, but it was planted I think in '78 when a student who was a teaching assistant with Richard, her name was Lynn Matthews, and she was killed, not at the farm, but in a rather tragic accident. And Richard, in his way, got all of the landscape faculty and students and everybody together with shovels, and this was an old parking lot, and we transformed that area and planted fruit trees in her memory. And her parents were very touched. They came by and saw what we were doing on the day of the service, and they actually gave us a very generous grant that has been very helpful to have the farm continue. Without that, it would have been even more of a struggle than it has been. So continuing the new orchard down further has a really nice feeling. It's really the first time the farm is expanded. Of course, it used to be all where this building is, but we actually have kind of captured more land than we ever had. The downside is it's not all one place, you know, and it's kind of nice, especially if 125 people, to really feel 125 people. On the other hand, 125 people, it's kind of nice to get spread out a little bit. So it's kind of a mixed blessing as I see it.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.